Hi everyone. I hope you're well. We'll get started just now. So just a quick introduction to myself. My name's Dan Cudmore. I am the UK Engagement Manager at Big Health. Big Health is an organisation who are helping millions back to good mental health through some digital therapeutics, one of which is Sleepio, which I'm sure has lots and lots of relevance to today's talk, which is Darker Days, How to Look After Your Sleep This Winter. And I'll shortly be introducing Dr Dimitri GavrIloff, who will be talking us through lots of helpful information on sleep, which I'm sure all of you here will find really, really insightful and helpful. Before I hand over, I just wanted to introduce Dimitri. Dr Dimitri GavrIloff is a clinical psychologist and sleep medicine specialist. He sees both adults and children with sleep disorders. He's a clinical course tutor on the Oxford online programme in sleep medicine, and he also runs a non-respiratory sleep disorders service. Dimitri works for Big Health as the clinical engagement lead for Sleepio too. So welcome, Dimitri. Good afternoon.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. Hi, everyone.
Great stuff. Thanks, Dimitri. So I'll hand over to you now. Obviously, as you know, this webinar should be recorded and posted on the National Wellbeing Hub at some point in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully that answers the question that I've just seen come through in the Q&A. As Dimitri's going through, feel free to post in the Q&A. We'll keep an eye on those questions. I think Dimitri is going to speak for 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and have plenty of time for discussion and chat once Dimitri is finished. So I hope you all find it useful. But over to you, Dimitri.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks very much, everyone, to you for joining us to talk about sleep. And yes, the evenings are getting darker sooner, and winter's on its way. But we've had a really nice bright day in Oxford here today, and so we should remember that even in darker days, there's still sunshine that comes through. Right. So without further ado, let's talk about sleep. Can't talk about sleep without first positioning sleep in the natural world. So sleep is something that we do as humans. We all know that because we've done it since we were little. But it's certainly something we see out in nature too. And we see it across a whole range of organisms, even right down to very, very primitive organisms. We see sleep-like behavior. And even in plants, we see differences in terms of what happens during the night and what happens during the day. We wouldn't call it sleep per se, but it is different in terms of things like gaseous exchange, photosynthesis. But certainly as mammals, all of our mammalian cousins sleep. And you've got a nice range of cute and cuddly and certainly less cute and cuddly animals there on the screen. And you can see that actually the amount of sleep required for any given species of mammal really does vary quite a lot. And what will be interesting to notice here too is that not only does it vary in terms of the length of time it takes for that animal to have its sleep need met, it also happens at different times during the 24-hour period. So what you can see is that brown bats sleeping for inordinate amounts of time, 20 hours a day, but doing so primarily during daylight hours. Maybe other animals sleeping primarily during the day, during the night, and you know that most of us humans tend to do that too. But interesting also in terms of what mammals are capable of doing. We have animals like dolphins, cetaceans, where we see something known as hemispheric sleep with only half the brain at any one time to allow for going up to the surface to breathe. Various birds that do it too. So some really interesting variety in terms of sleep. But something that we see right across the board. And the inference, of course, is that if it's seen at that level, if it's seen with that kind of level of ubiquity, this is something that probably started evolving a very, very, very long time ago and did so in the context of a planet like ours that has day and night in equal measure, more or less. So there are some planets that are locked in an orbit whereby there's one side of the planet's constantly in sun and one's constantly in darkness. But on our planet, we get this pattern of darkness and light, which we'll talk about a little bit more because it has a very important implication in terms of what we do and how our bodies change across the 24-hour period. But sleep is important. It's something that is crucial across the board for lots of different functions in humans. And it's something we can't do without, but it's also something that comes with an evolutionary risk. So when we're sleeping, we don't socialize, we don't make anything, we don't reproduce, we're not very productive. But what happens when we sleep is so important that the risk of being predated upon, because lying there prone as you are out in the sticks, if back in the day, if we're thinking about it, you're at risk of attack by wild animals, by being eaten by predators. Sleep must be so important that it's worth that risk. And actually, we know it's important for a range of reasons. And I'm going to give you a couple here, but this is not an exhaustive list. Sleep is crucial for what we call the glymphatic process, or as I kind of call it, the janitorial process of sleep. This is where metabolic waste, so this is the stuff that accrues throughout the waking period, gathers in the brain and body and is dealt with across, specifically in the brain, dealt with across the period of sleep. So this is a bit like what you might see in the office back when we were, of course, using offices. No one's using offices anymore, but and you'd leave all those coffee cups. I work in the NHS. I know what it's like sometimes in the restroom, in the break room, and there are coffee cups that have been there culturing all kinds of different molds. And the janitorial team come in, the cleaner team come in, and they clean it all out and they make it ready for the next day. And that's what happens in the brain at night. So when we sleep, the glymphatic process, the brain is able to clear itself of metabolic waste and optimize function for the next day. It's also crucial in terms of what we call anabolic and metabolic processes, the building, the repairing, the restoring processes that go on, the regenerative processes that go on in the body and the brain. It's also, of course, very important for learning and for memory consolidation. This is something that any one of you there who's ever done an exam, i.e. everyone, will remember that, if you stay up all night cramming for the exam, very often you struggle the next day because you find it difficult to retain the information. Whereas what we're much better doing, and I've done that too, but what we're much better doing is, doing what our parents tell us to do, which is to say, work during the day, study hard, and then sleep, get a good night's sleep before the exam, to allow for this information to be encoded and for the information to be retrieved more effectively the next day. Another really important part of what sleep offers us is around emotion regulation. And so we know that when people are sleep deprived, when they are, I'm a parent of, or I'm a father of two small children, two little girls. Wonderful they are. They don't always sleep brilliantly, and as a result, parents like me are often a little bit sleep deprived, and it can make us sometimes a bit cranky or a little bit irritable. It can mean that our judgment's a bit off sometimes in terms of thinking about how much time we've got, or planning or organization. These are things that are patently obvious to anyone who's ever been really tired. But it has an emotional toll too. So we're less able to regulate our emotions when we haven't slept well. And of course, that's very obvious to anyone who's ever had a poor night's sleep. But if we think about this chronically, when someone struggles to sleep longer term, actually struggling to sleep longer term is associated with an increased risk of development of a variety of mental health problems. It doesn't mean that it's something that's invariably going to happen. But of course, it means that protecting our sleep and doing our best to make sure sleep happens in a healthy way is protective for all kinds of things. So what we have here too is a fantastic diagram. It just goes a little bit. There's a fantastic colleague, sleep researcher in the States, a chap called Matthew Walker, who's actually from Liverpool, I think, originally. And he published a great essay called Sleep Essentialism. But this is the figure from this essay. Fantastic range of things associated with sleep. So associated with the cardiovascular system, metabolic system, immune system, thermoregulatory system, the endocrine system, the reproductive system. And it's also crucial across all these other things on the right-hand side too, as we've talked about: emotion reactivity, mood regulation, learning and memory, attention, the glymphatic process that I talked about, creativity, and of course decision-making. So sleep is something we want to prioritize. It's not an optional extra. It's not a luxury. It's not a nice to have. It is a crucial part of what we need. So when we talk about sleep, it's difficult sometimes to get a sense of really what we mean by sleep. Sleep is not just lying there inert. It's much more complicated than that, actually. And so when we think about the different stages of sleep, we break these stages down. Here we've got 5 different stages. The first one is the stage of being awake, which isn't a sleep stage, but we still stage it. And then we have the 3 green stages here of non-REM sleep. And you can see that actually in the first third of the night, within the first 3 hours, this is of course a generic plot, we go down into deep sleep very quickly. So stage 3 sleep is deep sleep, what we call deep sleep. That's where the clearance of toxins is happening. That's where the brain prioritizes its sleep need. And you can see that actually we spend quite a bit of time, but probably only about a third of the night, in that deep sleep state. We don't do it later on in the night. We get it out of the way because it's so important. And then as we go through the night, we cycle down into these sort of troughs, these valleys, and up onto the tops of these peaks. And this cycling up and down through the sleep stages is what's known as sleep cycling. So we have a sleep cycle that lasts about 90 minutes in adults, roughly, somewhere to maybe 90 to 120 minutes, something like that. Much shorter in young children, but roughly that in adults. And you can see that it's punctuated by these periods of red sleep, known as REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And rapid eye movement sleep is as its name suggests, a sleep state associated with very quick movements of the eyes that signifies emotive dreaming or narrative dreaming. So this is where we dream with our emotions, processing emotions from the day, thinking carefully about things we've done. It's associated with learning too. And this dreaming sleep is crucially important too. So all these stages of sleep are fantastically important. They all happen in a certain way, which has evolved, as I say, over countless generations. But you see that we also have these brief nocturnal awakenings too. So at the end of a sleep cycle, we might wake up very briefly. And if you're anything like me, you might sort of try and find the cold side of the pillow and then snuggle back down again for sleep. And that's what I tend to. I mean, don't really remember it. It just sort of happens, and you assume it happens. But it happens to us all throughout the night, probably 3 or 4 or 5 times, maybe. With people who wake like that and find it difficult to get back to sleep for whatever reason, maybe they wake up and think, oh gosh, I'm awake again, and get worried about it. Maybe they'll stay awake for a longer period. But the reality is that those brief awakenings are totally normal, totally natural, so long as they're brief, and not a problem. When they're a little bit more extended, they can be problematic, and we can talk about what to do if that happens a little bit later on. So the question I probably get asked more than anything else is, well, how much sleep do I need? What's the right amount for me to get? And it's a really interesting question. It's a one that again needs a bit of legwork in terms of contextualizing, because if we think about sleep need, we've got to think about how old the person is, where they are in their life, to be able to contextualize their sleep need. So you have a little baby, a newborn, who might need up to 20 hours a day, potentially, at a really, really top end, but probably in the region of 14 to 17 hours a day. And that's in little naps and things. And of course, that's a huge amount of time. But as we get into adolescence, which will be relevant, and of course, the childhood stuff will be relevant to those of you who are parents, you can see that this sleep need decreases over the first few years. And in fact, the most dynamic period of sleep is that first 0 to 18, where we have a huge reduction in sleep need across actually quite a short space of time before it eventually plateaus in adulthood. And what's crucially interesting about this is that people who like to think I kind of need 8 hours, roughly 8 hours, something like that, really they may be speaking to an average, a population average in adulthood, but actually the range in adulthood can be very broad. So it could be between 7 and 9 hours in terms of the recommended range. But there may be people who are actually pretty short sleepers naturally. They maybe sleep for only 6 hours and find that that's plenty for them. They're rested and happy and no problems at all with function. And it may be people who actually need a little bit more sleep, maybe 10 or 11 hours, in order to feel fully rested in adulthood. And so the range is very, very broad. But we see this too with other things, just like someone's shoe size. So If we think about trying to work out what shoe size you are, you wouldn't go online and think, well, I'm a 40-year-old guy, living in Oxford. What's my shoe size? It's a ridiculous way to work out what your shoe size is. The best way, of course, is to go to a shoe shop and try on a couple of pairs of shoes and get a sense of how big your shoe size is, how big your feet are, maybe measure them. And so we do the same for sleep, or we recommend the same for sleep, and that's to say, just think carefully about, how much do I need to feel rested, to feel really rested, to feel as if I'm waking sort of relatively naturally, rather than having to be woken. So having to wake with an alarm every day is a good sign that you're not getting enough sleep. And feeling sleepy during the day, again, is a good sign that you're not getting enough sleep. So these are kind of just thought-provoking reflections, really. But in adulthood, we might need roughly between 7 and 9 hours. So another really important thing to talk through is the idea of how sleep is regulated. So sleep is regulated by two processes, what we call the two-process model of sleep. And in the first process, we call the sleep drive, or the homeostat, and we call this in plain English, we call it sleepiness. So across the day, you get more and more sleepy until you get to the point where you're really, really sleepy and your propensity for sleep is very, very high. So given half a chance, you fall asleep. And across the sleep period, as you're allowed to sleep, that sleep pressure that we often refer to it as dissipates across that sleep period, such that when you wake, you feel refreshed, you don't feel that sleepiness anymore, and you're able to get on with the day. So what you can see is that the debt we pay for being awake is sleepiness, and then we pay that debt off in sleep, and then we wake up ready to accrue sleep debt again. Now, what's crucial is that process can happen, and it happens relatively regularly for many of us, but it's something that is impacted on by what we call our circadian rhythm. And the circadian rhythm is a reference to really the 24-hour changes in physiological function that we see in humans associated with changes in the light-dark cycle. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. But across the day, we get more and more alert until we hit a sort of peak, typically in our biological middle of the biological day. And then as we come down into the evening and into the night, and certainly down into the early hours, we get this reduction in alertness. So the propensity for alertness is reduced. And as such, we are much more likely to sleep in the later part of the biological day, because we've got that reduced alertness from the circadian rhythm, higher sleepiness, and so the two together put us to sleep and keep us asleep. But what we have to also understand is that the circadian rhythm, that body clock, in humans is probably a little bit longer on average than a 24-hour day. Most humans, we have an average of about a 24.2-hour day. So what we have to do is have some kind of mechanisms for keeping the clock on time. Think of it like a big grandfather clock in your brain, and every morning it has to be tweaked a little bit just to make sure that it doesn't run late or early. And what we have here is a fantastically interesting mechanism involving light. So light hits the eye, hits the back of the eye, the retina, and in the retina there's a group of cells known as photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and these cells take in the wavelength of light, and they convey that information to the master clock, what we call the master clock, the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, that sit just under the optic chiasm there in the brain. And this master clock then coordinates all the other clocks in our body. So every cell in your body has a natural rhythm, natural 24-hour rhythm. If we took one of the hairs out, I won't take a hair out of my head, I haven't got that many left, but if we took a hair out of my head, pop it there on a petri dish, it would keep a natural rhythm of around 24 hours. And what's really important is that is kept in time, or kept entrained with the light-dark cycle outside through the role of light. And we call that a Zeitgeber, which is the German for a time giver. But there are other time givers too. There are other Zeitgebers, and these include things like meal times, so having regular meal times, regular levels of activity, but activity primarily in the earlier part of the biological day. Temperature change is important too as a Zeitgeber. And keeping these Zeitgebers regular helps keep sleep regular and consistent. right? So this is the way in which we have evolved to keep locked, if you like, with the cycles of light and darkness, which in the equatorial plane don't really have a huge amount of variability, but in certainly at our latitudes, we get big changes in terms of how much light is available to us during any particular period. So currently, it's only, what is it now? Nearly 4:30, and it's already getting pretty dark. And so what's interesting is that the brain and the pineal gland particularly, which is where this hormone known as melatonin is secreted, will change the degree to which melatonin is secreted. Melatonin will be secreted for a bit longer during longer periods of darkness, i.e. during the winter, so that the brain is able to allow for seasonal change, which is fascinating. And seasonal change, of course, happens very gently. But the fact that we have a mechanism to flex for that is very interesting. So when we think about kind of advice for sleep, we want to kind of think more about this from an evolutionary perspective. We have evolved to sleep at night. And at night, if you look outside, if you've got a window near you, you'll see it's darker. It's probably a little bit quieter now that the sun's gone down. It's certainly cooler. And so we have these good indicators for what naturalistically we would need for sleep to take place in an optimal sense. And so very often that might mean just cooling your room a bit. Lots of us will have the heating blaring. All of you up in Scotland, I'm sure it might be a little bit cooler than it is down here in Oxford. But the point is that sleep likes the cold. Sleep needs that reduction in temperature in order to happen optimally. We lose maybe a degree and a half of core body temperature across the night period. We lose that temperature through natural radiation of core body temperature, and it's important. It's an important part of the thermoregulatory process that we go through throughout the 24-hour period. So if you have a very hot room, a room with lots of bed covers, and you're wearing a nightie and a dressing gown or whatever with socks and stuff, your body may not be able to release the heat that it needs to release. And so I always recommend keep the room at around 18 degrees, something like that. Nice, comfortable bedclothes that allow for enough heat to radiate. Don't be cold, be warm, but allow the room to be cool enough such that happens. And keep it dark. So lots of the time we may illuminate inside the house with big bright lights. Think about what's happening outside. At night, the sun's going down, in the evening, the sun's going down. Mimic that in the house maybe. So dim the lights a bit, make it cooler, make it calmer, make it darker, and allow for melatonin to start to be secreted. So melatonin secretion happens in the absence of light. And all we're doing is we're saying, right, we'll try and mimic that environment. These days, we can extend the day much, much, much longer than we could do in the past. We can keep the day happening by illuminating our homes inside. So we're just trying to mimic what goes on naturally. Earplugs, maybe, if you find that actually you've got a noisy house, or you've got a noisy bed partner, or dogs that like to go for a walk in the middle of the night around the house, whatever it happens to be, within reason, you might want to keep earplugs to kind of keep the noise down a bit. And make sure you have a room that is comfortable. So using things like good quality bedding, and keeping it clear of clutter that might otherwise kind of irritate you or remind you of work. Thinking carefully about other things you might do before bed. We talk a lot about caffeine with regard to sleep, and that's for good reason, because caffeine as a molecule is one that will block the brain's ability to detect what we call sleepiness. So that sleep pressure that we talked about earlier is correlated with the accumulation of a molecule called adenosine in the basal forebrain, and that is the receptors in that part of the brain are blocked, if you like, by the action of the molecule caffeine. So having it in your body stops your body feeling the sleepiness that doesn't allow you then to get to sleep. So we need that sleep pressure. So reduce your caffeine intake. Have it first thing in the morning if you'd like, but remember, it takes between 3 and 7 hours for the amount of caffeine in your body to reduce by half the half-life, depending on your metabolism. So just be careful, be cautious, experiment. There are loads of great decaffeinated drinks out there now, decaffeinated teas, which are around decaffeinated coffees, which taste really good. And so experiment with that kind of stuff. Having a wee drink over Christmas, as many of us will be, just be careful about how close you have the alcohol to bedtime. Alcohol is lovely, and at the same time it is also a central nervous system depressant, so it will put you to sleep quite quickly, but doesn't keep you asleep, and actually it affects the way in which your sleep architecture, so those peaks and troughs that we saw earlier, it'll affect how they happen across the 24-hour across the sleep period, often resulting in shallower sleep later on that's more broken, but deep sleep at the beginning. Eating, again, experiment too, maybe having a big meal, which is something that many of us do, especially on darker nights, in the evenings kind of close in, nice big hearty meal. Well, maybe having that a bit earlier so you're not digesting it too close to bedtime might be more helpful. Again, I don't have any prescriptions here. It's just about trying to make sure you're doing whatever is best for you. But the invitation is there to experiment a bit. So whenever I get asked by a radio DJ, they always say in the typical radio DJ voice, what's your top tip for sleep? And I always kind of think, well, there's lots to recommend about sleep in terms of different things to do, but actually the best thing, or the most straightforward thing I can recommend is trying to get up at the same time every day. And that's because of the effects of light that we just talked about. So light has that entraining effect. We get up every morning at exactly the same time and get a good burst of light, whether it's through sunshine, as is sometimes the case in the UK, or maybe it's through just bright lights at home. That helps to set the clock for the day. It helps to keep the clock running on time. And so we want to make sure that that's as consistent as possible, and that we allow that to be anchored. Now, if it's happening very, very early, then it might be too early for you. But the reality is that we kind of have to find a happy medium between the work, our work commitments, our family commitments, and our own biological clock. And so the invitation there is to experiment a bit, find out what works for you. Where's the optimal kind of meeting point of those two? And if we have here someone who is sleeping a bit all over the place, so you can see that actually there are periods of wakefulness interspersed with periods of sleep. If this person just went to bed and started getting up reliably at 7 o'clock every day, getting up at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock maybe, and just nailing one side of it down, I expect that to some degree the rest would fall into place too. So you wait until you're sleepy tired in the evening to get into bed, and that's a good indicator of being able to fall asleep. And then you get up at the same time every day, and in doing so you anchor one side such that the other side then is more predictable, more consistent. When we think about the bed, we can think about all kinds of things that we might do, things like using our phones. Some people might work in bed, read, maybe watch telly. I've known people who've eaten in bed, had the dinner in bed. What we do in bed is sleep. We all sleep in bed, but if we think about how best to use bed in a way that helps to allow for a strong association between sleep and bed, what we say is keep the other stuff that is confusing outside the bedroom. Keep that annoying phone with its notifications pinging away. You don't need that if you're trying to sleep, right? So keep it somewhere else. I know it sounds like simple advice, but it can be difficult to do. Maybe those work documents, maybe that work laptop that's just peeking at you, winking at you from the chest of drawers across from the bed, maybe that's a bit of an irritation. Maybe it's sending a signal that you still haven't done some work and you actually need to carry on doing it. Maybe pop that aside too, just because that's the kind of thing that can be stimulating. And at the same time, think about how you can make the bedroom relaxing. What is it that when you walk into the bedroom, you think, I like being here. This is relaxing. This is calming. Nothing to do with the stimulation of the day. And I've put tennis rackets and tennis balls down there because we can think of this a bit like the metaphor I always use is playing tennis. So if I say to someone like Dan, I say, Dan, grab a tennis racket. Let's head down to the courts. Dan will assume, because of the context and the stimulus, that we'll go and play tennis, right? And if we arrive at tennis courts and instead of playing tennis, I say, Dan, right, let's talk about that sleep lecture, or let's think about insomnia, or let's talk about the football, or whatever it happens to be. Over a week of doing this, when I next say to Dan, on Monday next week, grab a tennis racket, let's head down to the courts, Dan may not be so ready to associate the stimulus in the context with playing tennis anymore, because we're starting to do other things in the courts. We're talking about football, we're talking about sleep. And so actually the stimulus has become less strongly associated with bed. Keep bed a strong stimulus for sleep. Keep it as a strong paired association between being in bed and being asleep. And the way we do that is making sure we don't bring other stuff into the bedroom that's going to disrupt that stimulus. Don't make it ambiguous. If you struggle to fall asleep in bed and you're lying there and you're thinking, still not happening, still not sleeping, then get out of bed, because what you're doing there is you're associating being in bed with being awake, with being alert, and with probably worrying a bit about it. Don't make the bed a battleground. Go downstairs, have a nice herbal cup of tea or decaf or something, and read a book. Relax. Watch something calming on telly, and just allow yourself to relax, to become sleepy again. And of course, sleepiness is still there. It's just being masked by irritation and anxiety about falling asleep. And then when you're ready, and you're sleepy again, get back up and go back to sleep. And that's how we reassociate being in bed with being asleep. It's called stimulus control. Napping is an interesting one. We talk about napping as being helpful for people with their sleep, but actually napping really is something that, at least in our culture, isn't necessarily very helpful. So if we nap during the day, we steal the sleep pressure that we need in order to fall asleep later on in the night. So if we go to sleep too early, we end up taking a chunk out of our sleep pressure and we won't fall asleep later on. So staying awake, that's not the same for kids. Kids need their naps developmentally, but for adults, we don't need to nap during the day by and large. And making sure that we do our exercise at the appropriate time is also important too. So doing exercise in the bright light of the day, earlier in the day, certainly in the earlier part of the biological day, so where we have that peak in alertness, is going to mean that better optimized performance, right, relative to doing it at night and in the evening when we're already starting to come down. So we want to allow that shift into a kind of a calmer, more relaxed, quieter state of being in the evening and at night. And so maybe experimenting with doing less exercise at that time, more exercise earlier in the morning is best. The final thing I wanted to say is another thing we maybe don't give enough time to is thinking about slowing down, winding down. We do this with kids all the time. We say, right, you need a bedtime routine, have your dinner, you have a bath, you have a story, and you have a hug, and then you're off to bed. And you've got this nice routine that is predictable, that doesn't change, and it actually is, it's been shown time and again clinically to be a very effective intervention for people with children with sleep problems. Adults can do that too. We can have a period of time where we maybe take a pen and paper and we sit down, maybe 7 o'clock at night, and start writing down all the things that we've got to do tomorrow. So things like, well, I've got to call Dan about that seminar. I've got to also write to that person there, and I've got her number there. And you just make a list of all these things that you've got to do tomorrow. Put them down, get them on the page, and then when you're ready and you think, okay, that's pretty much everything, be pedantic. Go back over it, read it through. Is there anything else I need to add to that? No, anything to that? No. Then grab your phone and put on a timer. And then that timer, set it for tomorrow morning, right? And then make a sort of a contract with yourself that you'll sit there and go, okay, I'll come back to this at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I don't need to do anything now. I'll come back at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and I'll do it. And I've got the timer on, so I know I won't forget. So as you do that, what you end up doing then is you end up giving yourself a bit of space from the thoughts, from the worries. It gives you a bit of something we call worry scheduling or postponing worry. And what it allows you to do is then go to bed and get into bed and think, do you know what, it's okay, I've got that on the list. When these things come up, no, it's okay. I pop that on the list. I don't need to do that now. And if it is something that you haven't put on the list, you can scribble it on a piece of paper and leave it there on the bedside table. But the idea is this isn't, it's not a very highfalutin technique. It's just a very straightforward way of trying to make sure that we don't get caught up in the worries and anxieties that we experience as we get ready for sleep. Another thing we can do is to do something like a bit of meditation. So I'm a long-term meditator, and meditation's been part of how I've lived my life for the last 30 plus years, since teenage years, and it's been very important for me. But not everyone sort of connects with it too much. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there these days about mindfulness, which is fantastic, but you don't need to become an expert meditator immediately. This is something that you can approach, in the same way you'd approach any new skill, so gently and with some sense of curiosity. Want to learn about it, want to read about it, try it, a little bit as you go. So these are things that are helpful if they're approached in a helpful way. Could also be a bit of yoga. Could also be watching something you find funny, relaxing, enjoyable. There's a lot of doom and gloom on the old telly box these days. And life is tricky. We've got climate change, we've got political unrest, we've got all kinds of things happening. So the idea here is, before bed, that stuff's important. We have to deal with it, but we need to sleep too. We need to rest too, so we can pick it up tomorrow. But actually, for now, let's come back to a space of feeling calm and relaxed prior to sleep. Now, the way I like to talk about this with people I see, patients, is think a bit like stopping distance in a car. If you try and stop a car that's going 100 miles an hour in a couple of meters, you end up with a really, really nasty situation. So what we end up doing, if we want to slow down from 100 miles an hour to a stop, is we take a long stretch of road and we slow down very gradually, and we get ready for sleep in a very similar kind of way. So we gradually wind down, rather than thinking, right, that's me for the day, I'm finished, and then hopping into bed. Your mind's still going to be whirring. So this isn't rocket science. I'm not trying to be flippant, but these are important things to kind of reevaluate if you're noticing that you're getting stuck with them. So here's a couple of tips to kind of recap. So keep sleep regular rise time because of the importance of light, regular routine because it's predictable. It's something that also works with the circadian rhythm, that predictability of activity. Keep the bed and bedroom dedicated to sleep. So make sure that the bed association, the bed sleep association is strong. Develop a wind down routine so you can gently wind down to help sleep. And protect sleep from competing demands. So things like that noisy mobile phone that's pinging away with WhatsApps or Facebooks or whatever, Facebook notifications. This is important stuff. It's going to be stuff that it's designed to be enticing, designed to be stimulating. So it's kind of not the stuff that we want to have on our bedside table. Maybe we want to have it just out of eye shot. With put the ringer on if you have to, if you've got someone who might call that you need to watch out for. But also keep active during the day. Dynamic daytime activity is a good predictor of good sleep. Being active, especially during the morning, getting out, going, vigorous daytime activity, particularly in the morning, is good. It's a good thing. It's just like all kind of health promoting behaviors. And keep sleep for the nighttime. So remember, sleep in humans happens during darkness at night. It doesn't happen during the day, and we haven't evolved to sleep in that way. So if you can do sleep during the nighttime, I know there'll be shift workers out there listening to this, and that's okay too. Shift work is inherently a bit odd for us as diurnal animals, as daytime animals, because it's not something that comes naturally. But if you're going to try and work at night and sleep during the day, try and make your room at home as night-like as possible. When you're coming back from a shift, try and keep the lights as dim as possible. When you come into the bedroom, don't be turning on all the lights, don't be looking at your phone. Treat it just like you would do at nighttime. Keep those blackout blinds down. Do not disturb sign on the door, earplugs to stop any noise from outside, things like that. They're basic things, but just to protect your sleep. And keep sleep the same on weekdays and weekends. We are in the UK, we're very fond of our lie-ins, and that's okay. People lie in for good reason, but if you're lying in for a long time on the weekend, what it probably means is you're not getting enough sleep during the week. So why not try and get enough sleep during the week too? It might change your life. Then you might not have to spend so much time on the weekends catching up. And if you really struggle with your sleep and you need a bit more help, then there is evidence-based sleep medicine out there for you through cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, principally through Sleepio, which I'm going to talk to you a bit about now. So Sleepio is a clinically evidenced therapy, gold standard therapy, no waiting list. It's CBT for insomnia, founded by Professor Colin Espy, who's a professor of sleep medicine here at Oxford, and it's something that we know works really well. So CBT for insomnia is recommended as the first-line treatment for insomnia disorder in clinical guidance through NICE, for example, and it's something that isn't routinely available in the NHS, unfortunately, through mental health services. It should be, but it isn't. And so what we're lucky to do is being able to use something like CBT for insomnia, very well evidenced treatment approach for the problem, make it automated. We've tested that a lot. We know it works very well. So Sleepio itself has I think 12 RCTs to date, showing that it's a very effective treatment for improving sleep and improving mental health alongside improvements to sleep. It's something anyone can access straight away, something that's safe. It doesn't have the kind of adverse side effects that sleep medications do. It's CE marked, it's validated by NICE, recommended in various guidance, including the British Association of Psychopharmacology guidance, and it's tried and tested. It's been used by over 100,000 users now in population level rollouts, including population level rollouts in Scotland. So in Scotland, it is available to every single adult in the country, which is fantastic. So everyone can access it. And all you've got to do is go to www.sleepio.com/NHS. You do a quick 2-minute sleep test based on a standardized measure of sleep, and then you get a sleep score. And what it might tell you is your sleep is great, don't worry about it, get on with your life. And it might say, actually, do you know what, you might need a bit more help. And if you do need a bit more help, then you can meet the prof, very loosely modeled on Professor Espy, and learn a series of evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques with 6 weekly sessions delivered for about 20 minutes each through the automated platform that allow you to put things into place to change your sleep, to improve your sleep, and to get back to doing what you'd like in the way in which you'd like it during the day. So here are the QR codes, and if you'd like to use them, but you can of course go to the website, and we also have Daylight there. So Daylight is a similar evidence-based treatment for anxiety, actually this time, but it's something that you can access for free through the NHS in Scotland. So this is for generalized anxiety based on cognitive behavioral techniques. So that's me. Still got a bit of time for questions, but what I'll do is I'll stop sharing, and there we go.
Well, thanks, Dimitri, for that. That was really insightful. Thank you so much. We've had loads of questions, which is great. And thank you, everyone, for asking those questions. What I will say is, right now, we're not going to get through all of them, but we will certainly make an attempt after the session to pull something together and either share it with you guys for coming, who have all attended, or upload it to the National Wellbeing Hub. We'll definitely get a way of answering any questions that we missed back to you. So, Dimitri, I'm going to pose a few questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So we've had lots, as I say, and I've loved, there's lots of great responses helping each other out as well in the Q&A, which is fantastic. The first one I'm going to kick off with then is around working from home, and due to COVID, people are thinking a lot more about work now, it seems, and it often is, causing people to wake up during the night time. Is there anything people can do, Dimitri, do you think, to tackle some of that?
What a great question to start us off. So absolutely, there's lots you can do, and it's a really valid problem to have. Like I said, there's plenty of stuff about which we can worry, in daily life. There's lots of things that are genuine concerns. The only times that we really want to start, the stuff that is genuinely needs action, we can action straight away. The stuff that's kind of more existentially worrying, or if it's stuff about work, for example, that you can't action straight away, then this sort of stuff hangs in the ether, and it tends to disrupt sleep, but it also disrupts your day. It affects the way you feel during the day. Things like daylight, which is as I mentioned before, an evidence-based, CBT-based program for anxiety, is a great way of managing worries that appear during the day. If there are things that pop up in your mind at night, and that the link there, Dan, you said was to do with work, and of course people are working from home, and work is very much in our minds. My advice is advice that I will take myself, because I struggle with it a bit too sometimes, as we all do, and that's that give yourself plenty of time to wind down in the evening. What we tend to see is people clock off and then they kind of jump straight into bed, or they don't give themselves enough time to really decompress, right? Work is something that is all pervasive. If you're working in a room that's very close, if you're working at a kitchen table, for example, if you're working very close by to where you sleep, or even in your bedroom, as many students will be doing, then what you might see is that actually the association of that place with the stress of work is something that persists into the evening. We want to make sure these places are very differentiated, so that there's an office maybe, or there's a even if you work at one end of the kitchen table, and that's where you do your work, and you have the other end of the kitchen table for where you eat your food, and you just make sure you differentiate things. That's maybe one thing you can practically do. In terms of worries that come up at night, another thing you can try is maybe putting the day to rest. So going through, as I said in that one of the final slides there, things that you've got to do, put them down on a piece of paper, get them out of the mind, pop them on a piece of paper, and then come back to deal with them when you're ready, in your own time, right? Not in a time that suits the worry, in a time that suits you, that's convenient for you. If you find that you're awake at night and you're sitting there thinking, God, I can't stop thinking about this, that's fine too. But remember, trying to fight the thought's not going to make it any better. In fact, it'll just make you more irritated that it's still there. Just like getting one of those songs stuck in your head, the worst thing you can do is start getting irritated about it, because it just means that it sticks around for longer. So if that happens, give up. Don't try harder. Give yourself a break. Get out of bed. If you can manage it, have your dressing gown ready on the end of the bed, slippers ready by the side of the bed, head somewhere quiet and relaxing, and go and read a book. Go and switch off, watch some telly, do something that will relax you and make you feel calm. And then when you're ready, go back to bed again. The worst thing you can do is to get really upset, which of course many of us do. I understand it, when you can't get back to sleep. Because trying harder to get to sleep is not the way sleep happens. Ask my parents-in-law. My parents-in-law sitting on the sofa watching telly. They're trying to watch the telly, but what they end up doing is that they end up either nodding off like that. One goes forward, one goes back, and then what you see is that the reason that's happening is because they're tired, they're sleepy, but they're trying hard to watch the telly and stay awake, and as a result, they're falling asleep. Right? They're trying to stay awake, so they're falling asleep. When we do the opposite, when we try and fall asleep, what we end up doing is we create anxiety, anticipatory anxiety, that means we stay awake. It's not an active process, falling asleep. Falling asleep is something we give up being awake, and that's how we fall. That's why we fall asleep. It's not something we have to chase. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope it was helpful.
Thanks, Dimitri. Really good. We've had quite a few come through. I'm just trying to find the ones that seem to be liked or have come through a couple of times. So one is about waking in the night, Dimitri, not necessarily linked to COVID, but people say they find themselves waking up maybe 3-4 a.m. During the night. So regular kind of waking during the middle of their sleep. Is there anything that people can do to help with that?
So I guess the first thing to say is, if you notice that you have a persistent problem with your sleep, right? First thing to say is you're not alone, right? 1 in 10 of us adults in the UK will meet criteria for insomnia at a diagnostic level. That's not meant to be scary. What that means is that lots and lots and lots of us have had problems with sleep in the past. I've had problems with sleep in the past myself, right? We've all had a troublesome night. When something is persistent and it's causing you problems, the best thing you can do is to seek evidence-based advice or evidence-based support, treatment, whatever you want to call it. So Sleepio is a really good way of accessing that. And I'd recommend that if it's something that's coming up again and again and again for you, then going on to Sleepio, getting yourself an account and starting to work through the program, that's probably the best thing to do, right? The advice that they'll give you, or the advice that will be tailored to you through Sleepio, through the program, will vary a little bit depending on the individual. But again, it comes back down to the association that we build up. So if we lie there predicting that we're going to get up at 3 or get up at 4, it becomes very, very quickly a self-fulfilling prophecy. We lie there and then we check the clock. Oh God, it is 4 o'clock, isn't it? I knew it was going to happen, and it becomes part of the pattern. Absolutely understandable that it does become part of the pattern, but the best thing to do is to not let that become a pattern that's then kind of becomes protracted, becomes kind of accentuated by involvement in the process. And so techniques like stimulus control that I talked about earlier, in terms of leaving the bed, that's the kind of stuff that will be covered by Sleepio. And so the simple advice is go to Sleepio. That's why it's there. That's what it's there for. And hopefully it'll provide you the help that you need. And remember, it's evidence-based. It's been tried on lots and lots and lots and lots of people with very similar problems.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dimitri. Sort of linked, I think another question that we've had came through, and people feel like they're sleeping well during the night, but still waking up and feeling tired or exhausted. So perhaps not getting good quality sleep is their kind of feeling. What can you say to people who are maybe experiencing that, Dimitri?
So it's again really common for people to describe waking up still feeling tired. There's a couple of things to pull apart here. One of them is something we call sleep inertia. So sleep inertia is the grogginess that we all feel when we wake in the morning, to some degree. Now, it'll vary based on the individual, but most of us will experience a little bit of grogginess as we wake up. That's okay. That's not necessarily the sign of a bad night's sleep. That's just something. That's that's when you stick the key in the car and it goes and you have to do it 3 or 4 times before it starts. That's all right. What people maybe are referring to is a kind of a feeling of real exhaustion in the morning getting out of bed, and that may be the result of any number of things. And it could be the result of what I would think probably the most likely case is that it is insufficient sleep, or sleep is not necessarily happening in the right kind of way. Now, that may happen because of another sleep disorder. It might happen if you're let's say, for example, if you're a snorer, if you wake up in the morning with headaches, maybe your bed partner said occasionally you sound like you're stopping breathing. But it might be a sleep-related breathing disorder. That's something you might want to go to your GP and have a chat with them about, because that requires appropriate diagnosis and treatment. But this kind of thing is also made worse by things like having a drink before bed. So having a little bit too much to drink before bed maybe affects the quality of your sleep. Being particularly worried might affect the quality of your sleep. There are lots of things that can affect the quality of your sleep. But coming back to thinking healthily, eating well, getting out, doing the exercise you need to do, good exposure to light, all these kinds of things will help. It's difficult to know exactly what people are coming up against, because this is a problem that stems from lots of different sources. But I hope those kinds of suggestions are helpful.
Thank you, Dimitri. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more. So there's a couple coming around kind of light, SAD and things like that. But what I will say to everyone is we actually have a session coming up on the 7th of December, which will touch much more on those issues in sleep. So I think hopefully those questions we'll get to them in the follow-up. But just to say to everyone and to those people specifically asking about kind of daylight hours and that kind of thing, definitely look out for our session on the 7th of December. We've also had a few come in around the menopause, perimenopause and things like that, Dimitri. And again, I wanted to say to those people, we'll get round to them in the follow-up, but we do have a recording coming on the menopause and its impact on sleep. So I just wanted to say to those people, keep an eye out for that. It will be going on the National Wellbeing Hub. So that's something for people to look out for. So I'm going to pick one more question for you, Dimitri, around sleep and some of the things that people are saying. And I think one I wanted to pick out, which is particularly relevant to everyone here probably, is around shift work. And so people have asked, does sleep in the day have the same benefits as sleep in the nighttime? And, if I'm a shift worker, is there anything I can do to help really reap those rewards of sleep, despite it maybe being disrupted or shifting my patterns?
Fantastic question, and we've got 3 minutes to answer it. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm not going to be able to say enough in 3 minutes to convey just how important a problem this is, and I don't want to be dismissive. So I really want to acknowledge that this is a problem that requires lots of unpacking. Sleep during the day is good, so long as it's sleep that's taking. So if you're a shift worker and you're able to work in an environment that is entirely detached from the outside world, so you have darkness at home when you get home to sleep, and you have bright light at home, even though it is in the night, bright light at work. That's mimicking what's going on in the natural world. It should be, in an ideal kind of situation, relatively helpful. The reality is that we have a 24-hour oscillation in these processes I've talked about, the circadian rhythm. That means that most of us are kind of we're going against what our biology is doing naturally. So it doesn't get hoodwinked. It doesn't sort of change entirely. So we don't become nocturnal animals. We still retain our predisposition to being daytime animals. But what we can try and do is we can try and minimize the effects on that as much as we can. So there are things like, as I say, keeping the room as dark as possible when you get home, wearing sunglasses, or making sure you kind of avoid as much bright light in the mornings as possible, because remember, that's stimulating, that's alerting. We want that to be minimized if you're going to go to bed as soon as you get back. There are other things too, such as having sleep that might be in two pockets. So you might have a big block of sleep as soon as you get home, and you might have a longer nap in the later evening before you go on your shift, because maybe that's the easier way to do it. Sleep during the biological day, when you have that peak in the circadian alertness during the middle of the biological day, is probably quite difficult to achieve. And so there are lots of obstacles up against you when you're doing shift work like that, but there are ways in which you can minimize the effects, and I think that's probably that's the kind of take-home message for it. But I think we've got some stuff on shift work, and I think I seem to remember having done a shift work talk as well, so we can redirect people to that if helpful, because it's a really, really, really important topic. Really important topic.
Absolutely, thank you, Dimitri. Well, that is everything that we've got time for, I'm afraid, folks. Thank you so much for all of your questions. As I say, we will try and follow up with these questions. We will try and provide either an email out with some helpful answers, or indeed getting something up on the hub when this webinar goes live. So it will be recorded. As I say, it will go up onto the National Wellbeing Hub, and we'll make every attempt to answer the question. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Dimitri for his presentation, and there's lots of great comments coming in with some positive feedback, which we really appreciate, guys. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll let you get off for now. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it, and thanks for coming along. Sleep well.